Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to have you join us today here from Inspired Instruction with me, Michelle Regan. I'm one of the directors here, and I'm really excited to do today's webinar about social emotional learning. And we're calling it SEL in Action because this has been a common topic throughout when I go to schools, when I go to conferences, when I am looking on and engaging on social media forums, that social emotional learning is really a topic that a lot of people are talking about, but may or may not know exactly how to get started. So we're calling today SEL in Action. We have a combination of administrators and teachers joining us today. So we're hopefully going to hit on some of the bigger picture types of questions, as well as the very specific practical techniques and activities that you can start in your classroom as soon as tomorrow. So with that, again, I want to welcome everyone. Let's see what we're going to take care of today, what the different takeaways will be. I'm excited for you to just jump in and get started. So we're going to talk about the what and why of SEL. We're going to look at SEL competencies. Now, New Jersey came out with these in 2017, but you'll see that even if you don't hail from New Jersey, these competencies were created by CASEL, the leading organization on social emotional learning, and can be applied to any school district in any location in the country or worldwide. We're going to look at the three key components to a successful SEL implementation. And we're going to talk at the end about how do we put this all together. Okay. Now, obviously, we at Inspired Instruction do a full half-day workshop on this. So we're just going to be touching on these issues. And if you have questions, feel free to jot them down. At certain points throughout the presentation, I will be opening up the chat feature, and you're absolutely welcome to jot down your questions. Okay. So I want you to look at this screen and consider which of these describes what you envision when you hear social emotional skills. I'm going to give you a second to take a look. Okay. And many times when I present this, the groups will say to me things like, well, I definitely think it's about maintaining positive relationships and being able to manage your emotions, but I'm not so sure about the decision-making piece. And what I would encourage you to think about is all of these 5 different unique and might be able to say isolated skills are really necessary for students to be successful in school and outside of school, in their daily lives now and in the future. And so all of these describe social emotional skills. And what's more is that all of these are things that are appropriate to be taught in the schools. Many times when I go into districts, I'll hear some teachers say, you know, there's so much for us to do. This is just one more thing. And shouldn't this be something that happens at home? And the answer is we can't assume that kids are going to come to school with these skills. And if we don't address them, we're going to have multiple issues that are happening. Not only are kids going to be ill prepared for their future, but you're going to see, you know, the hallmarks of that in your classroom in terms of poor behavior, lots of conflict, difficulty working in groups, and poor academic achievement, quite frankly. So yes, this is the purview of the schools. And why is this so important? I'm going to pop these up. There's a lot of buy-in at this point in time from all of the stakeholders when we talk about education. If you take a look at this for a moment, you'll see that not just the people employed by the schools, but the general public and students themselves put such a high price on SEL and really identify the importance. So this is just a small snippet of the research that supports including social emotional learning in classrooms. Additionally, we can see some of the research that supports the outcomes that we would like for our students. So you can see that the research links social emotional skills to student gains, not only in achievement, which obviously 11 percentile point gains on standardized tests is huge, but that students have better attitudes about school and better classroom behavior. And that's really, really important. Um, we know the stress that teachers are under. And so if they could recognize or realize fewer conduct problems, fewer conflicts and outbursts in the classroom, and less other negative outcomes. So for example, what's not listed on this sheet is attendance, but there's also a link between social emotional skills being taught in the schools and increased attendance. Okay. If we look down at the bottom of this sheet, we also see the way that adults benefit. So there are teachers, we know that our teachers are leaving the classroom earlier and earlier. Turnover is quite a challenge currently due to burnout. And yet we know that if teachers are given time to work on and improve their own social emotional competencies, they're more likely to stay in the classroom. Okay. And additionally, there have been longitudinal studies that have shown that kids as young as kindergarten, when we measure their social emotional skills, we can see some of the major adult outcomes in terms of education and employment and mental health as them being significantly associated. Okay, so there's a lot of research and buy-in at this point coalescing behind SEL in schools. So that being said, where do we start? So I want to share with you New Jersey's social emotional learning competencies. They're called competencies and not standards. And when you take a look at them, the first thing I do when I go and do a training is ask the people in the room, look at this through the lens of your classroom, of your school building. So if you're an administrator of a K-5 school, these things are going to show up and look very different than a high school science teacher or a high school PE teacher. Okay. So if we were to do our full day training, we do quite a bit of a deep dive on what do these look like in your students based on their age and grade level and based on the population that is presenting in your school. It's definitely going to vary from community to community, from school to school, from classroom to classroom. Okay. But what I'd like you to do is keep these in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. So you might be honing in right now on social awareness. What might it look like for your third grade class to be able to recognize and identify the perspectives of others? How does that play out on a day-to-day? How is that currently incorporated into what you're teaching in terms of your curriculum? Okay, so we want to keep these things in mind as we go forward. And I just want to make a note here. I mentioned this a little bit ago, that many people are concerned that this would be considered an add-on. And what's important to note here is that it's really not an add-on. SEL done well should be fully integrated into everything else that we do on a daily basis. And I wanted to share this quote from the Common Core creators because I feel that this is really important. And we'll talk more about the standards in a few minutes. But the assumption here is really that kids are going to need these 5 areas, these 5 core competencies in order to achieve these standards. And so if you're thinking about math standards and the best practices woven into those are social emotional skills. Kids are being asked to justify and create arguments about their answers, to be able to reason. And so kids are going to have social self-awareness and then social awareness to do those in ways that are productive. And the same is true with ELA, and I'm going to give you an example in a few slides. So now that we've made that sort of disclaimer that this is not an add-on, I just want to share this idea. I love this visual because it really gives you a good starting point to consider that effective SEL needs to be comprehensive. We need to look at it in three different veins. So the first is a supportive classroom environment. The second is explicit SEL instruction. And the third is the integration of SEL and all of the instruction that's already happening on a daily basis. So if your school is one that has not rolled out SEL yet, this is an important piece for you to consider. And we're going to talk about what these look like as we go forward. If you're a school that maybe has purchased an SEL program and there are some direct instruction lessons happening, but maybe the other two are lacking. So if you're an administrator, this is where you might want to take a moment and take stock of where are we strong and where do we need some more work. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to dive into each of these three areas in terms of an overview and provide a few specific examples. Okay, so creating a supportive environment, what does that look like? So there are three areas here that we're going to touch on that every school can go tomorrow and get started. So we want to take stock of what's happening in your school right now related to these three areas. So student-centered discipline. This can be a workshop in and of itself. And so we're not going to spend too much time, but this is a place for you to consider, what does discipline look like in your school? What are the policies and how are they being implemented from classroom to classroom? Okay, so there are 5 simple bullets here, but it's a nice starting place for you to have some conversations, maybe with your administrative team, and then have that filter down in your staff meetings and PLCs about what's happening in classrooms. You can see here that the goal, which is directly connected to the SEL competencies, is to have students be able to identify and monitor their own behavior and emotions and be able to regulate them. So can they problem solve? Can they work through conflicts? Can they engage in self-reflection? Okay, so this is a really important conversation that you may need to have with your administrative team and/or teachers. This is what's going to help set the stage for what comes next. Positive relationships. When I go into districts and I do this workshop, I will ask, how many of you have positive relationships with your students? And every single hand will go up. We all think that we are doing a bang-up job at creating relationships with our students. But then when I ask the follow-up question, tell me how, be specific about how you create positive relationships. That's when I usually get some silence. Now, that doesn't mean that teachers aren't doing it. I think many are, but are they doing it in ways that are intentional and consistent? Are they repeating these practices on a daily basis, no matter what kind of day they're having as an adult? Okay, so that being said, I like to share 2 different aspects of classroom practices that you can get started on tomorrow. And as an administrator, I encourage you, if this is brand new, I encourage you to pick 1 or 2 areas that you are going to focus on, because it would be very overwhelming to start out trying to implement this idea of social emotional and having your teachers feel stressed about it. That's the last thing we want. So what do I mean when I say beginnings and endings and routines and rituals? Okay, so these are things teachers do every single day, whether you're an elementary, middle school, high school teacher, and even administrators can think about the way that they start and end their day when they're in the building. And I'm just noticing a typo, so I apologize for that. We all make mistakes and you'll hear that talked about next. But beginnings and endings. So what could you do as a teacher or an administrator every single day that kids would come to expect to identify that you are trying to create a relationship with them? Does the teacher stand at the door and greet students by name? The same goes for endings. How does class or the school day end every single day? And can it include something that focuses on relationship building? Okay. So that being said, if this is a classroom that's already doing exit tickets, could you do exit tickets that are social emotional in nature? And I wanted to mention that we have some excellent resources on our website, inspiredinstruction.com. And that's one of the resources that you can find. We've created some social and emotional learning exit tickets. And these are things that are going to get kids to consider how they're feeling about school, how they're feeling about the activities they engaged in, how they're feeling about their own level of performance or participation. And this is a great ritual to get in the habit of. Okay. Same things for other routines and rituals. So we would want you as a teacher or as an administrator to look at the current routines and rituals and tweak them to have a focus on creating positive relationships. So I'm just going to share one, and it's a great activity. This also is on our website, and it's called Feelings Four Corners. And most of you are probably familiar with an activity called Four Corners. It can be used in all content areas. And what you do with Feelings Four Corners is you pick 4 emotion words and you post them in the 4 corners of the room. And either when students just start the day or end the day, you ask them to go to the corner that they most identify with. You would want to be sure that you have some positive and negative, and you're going to give them a set amount of time to talk at their groups about why they chose that corner. When you do this 1 off or 2 off, it's not going to have an impact. But if you were to do this as a routine or a ritual, kids are going to become more engaged in the conversations, more likely to share maybe what's going on in their own lives. And just the idea of listening to someone else and identifying, hey, someone else is going through what I'm going through, can be really impactful for students. So this is another great one to consider. And when I did this workshop last, a teacher said to me, well, there's no way I could do that every single day. And I said, that's fine. Why not pick Fridays and do Feelings Four Corners Fridays? And so her plan when she left our workshop was to start the next Friday, pick her emotion word cards and have them up and ready for when kids walked in the room on Friday. So it's a real way to make sure that you're taking actionable steps to work on building relationships. Okay, growth mindset. So you heard me say a minute ago that mistakes are okay, and you saw that I made a mistake. This is huge, and many schools have begun implementing growth mindset in their buildings. And one of the ways that they've done it very nicely is by posting various sayings and posters and reminders for students, the caveats and the things that are true about growth mindset. So the one I want to share with you today is called The Power of Yet, or this idea of not yet, that you might be working very hard and you might be struggling and not getting things right. And you might not be getting the grades that you would like. But what we want to do is shift that and have us think about that we're not there yet. Okay. And if we can use that language with students, post it on the walls as part of a self-reflection, as part of a peer assessment, and we use that language, students will become more and more focused on their effort and their progress and less focused on the actual grade. I don't know about you, but when I was in school, if I got a paper that had a C or a D on it, I threw it away. I didn't go back and look at it and see what I got wrong. I didn't say to myself, oh, well, if I spend a few more minutes tonight on this, then the next time I get a test on this, I will get an A. No, I had a negative feeling about it. I didn't want to look at it again. And what's really important is that instead we make mistakes and failure, quite frankly, part of the learning. Okay, so again, if we had the full workshop, we would go into some of the other details here. But it's this whole idea that, and if we look at math, we can think of this perfectly as a great fit with the math standards. This whole idea of productive struggle is so important nowadays, getting kids to really work through and persevere through these tasks that are hard. But they're not going to do that if they know that most likely they're probably not going to get a great grade on this. So for administrators and teachers alike, I want you to think about, what am I doing right now in terms of growth mindset? Because tomorrow you can go in and start using this language of you're not there yet. And let's measure our progress to see when we can get there. Okay. I want to talk about now the second leg of that stool that you saw earlier. And these are the foundational practices. These are the areas that we would need to provide explicit instruction. And many people will ask, when I do this workshop, do I need to go out and purchase an SEL program? Because they're out there on the market. There are some very good ones. But here's the issue. We don't want you to buy a program, hand it off to teachers, and then they're going to fit in lessons, once a month, or during character ed week, or every other Monday when the guidance counselor comes in. Okay. The things that I'm talking about right now when I say explicit SEL instruction are, if you think back to those competencies earlier and think about things like self-awareness, social awareness, how are kids expected to just know how to do these things? So they will need explicit instruction in self-regulation as well as conflict resolution. Now, I'm not going to talk about mindfulness today because last month we had a webinar on mindfulness, so you're encouraged to go back to our website and check that out. But today we're going to dive into some best practices about the two other areas that I mentioned. So take a look at this for a minute. Hopefully you'll see here what should really jump out at you is this idea of some level of SEL happening daily. Okay, so yes, you may have specific lessons that you want to make sure you're dedicating time for, but around that, what language are we using? What vocabulary? Are we talking about feelings? Are we talking about the language that were in those competencies? Do kids know what it means when we say self-regulation? Okay, and then we want to consider, how are we providing ample practice across the day? So in a minute, I'm going to show you an activity you can do about conflict resolution. If you were to introduce that on a Monday, what's happening Tuesday through Friday? Can you target times to have kids practice? Maybe when you know there's going to be a difficult activity coming up, or there's going to be group work. Can we think about having kids reflect? You can see the bottom box talks about students reflecting on their own use of SEL skills. So these are daily opportunities that need to be intentional, but don't need to be from a store-bought program. Okay. Let's talk about conflict resolution. I think this is one that many of us, when kids get into conflicts in school, will say to the kids something like, can you guys go work that out? Okay. I think that we're doing kids a disservice when we don't teach them the how of working it out. Okay. Before anybody can work anything out, they need to first address, why is there a conflict in the first place? They need to address how they're feeling. Okay. So I love this visual, and I think it's a great one to use with kids, that in any situation where there's a conflict, think of it as an escalator. They've all been to the mall, so they've all seen these. Instead of making it worse and going up and up and up, consider ways to de-escalate and make it better. So the first way we do it is ask kids to identify, what's the conflict and how am I feeling? The second is to have some options. And again, these are going to need to be taught, but to have kids think about, I have options here. Do I need to take a break? Do I need to seek out an adult? Do I need to, just step away from the situation? And then they have to make the choice. So after considering the options, they have to think about, is my choice of behavior going to increase the problem here or de-escalate the problem? So this conflict escalator is a great direct instruction that I think needs to be taught to kids. If not in this way, you can do it in a similar way, but to get to kids to really consider these steps in the process before we ask them to work something out. Okay. Before I move on, I do want to open up the chat feature because I said I was going to do that and see if anyone has questions about anything we've gone over so far, because I realize there has been quite a few and we're going to have to wrap up momentarily. But if anyone has a question about the SEL direct instruction or what we did prior about positive relationships, feel free to jot that down. I did have some people who could not attend and sent some questions prior. I will make sure that I definitely address those. One I got earlier, I did already address, and some one or two teachers actually had sent in the same question about, do these really need to be taught in schools? Isn't this something that should be happening at home? And while I would agree that it would be great if these were happening at home, this is very cyclical. So if these moms and dads and guardians and grandmas and grandpas weren't taught these skills, or if their skills are come from a negative place, or if they have experienced trauma and they may not have the skills, they certainly can't reinforce it for the students. All right, I'm going to close the chat feature for now, and we will move on to how do we now integrate into our daily practices. So our daily academic work that every teacher in the building is doing. Okay. And if you look at this quote, I love this because it really does show that learning by nature is social and that this is all intertwined. So the three areas I want to cover here are standards aligned lessons, curriculum resources, and instructional practices. So I'm going to give you an example of a standards aligned lesson that would really fit so nicely and combine both the competencies and the standards. So I pulled a third grade reading literature standard, describe characters in a story, and it talks about their traits, motivations, feelings, okay? And then what I did was I went to the competencies and found which ones there was nice overlap. So self-awareness, social awareness, and responsible decision-making all had really nice overlap. So I picked out a few of the sub-competencies, and then I just made sure that that was woven into the lesson. So when children were looking at these fictional characters, what I wanted them to do was examine how emotions impact their lives and provide an opportunity for students to reflect on their own emotions and people around them. How we were going to do that was through a double entry journal. So this is a journal, basically you take a piece of paper and fold it in half, almost like a T-chart. And the students are going to jot down on the left-hand side the emotions of the character and how they impact the world around them. And then on the right-hand side, they're going to put their own emotional experiences and self-reflect. So you can see when teachers talk to me about, well, how am I going to incorporate this? This is a very simple way to incorporate and to have some overlap of my reading standards and my social emotional standards. If you want to check out some other examples on our website, we have a math example, and we're going to be developing more as we go forward. But it really starts with taking those competencies and matching them up against the standards as well as the activities that we were going to use and the instructional practices. In terms of our curriculum, many of our courses, and I would venture to say most of our courses, are literacy based. That being said, any text that we are using, be it literary or be it informational, fits so nicely into this. So you can see that we talked about characters' emotions. It's a great way to get us to look at a range of perspectives and experiences. It's also a great way to look at problem solving and how characters have addressed conflict and solved problems. Additionally, in history and in current events, we can look at relationships and how people, again, have solved problems and conflicts in the past. And we can also identify models of strong social emotional skills. So when you're looking at your curriculum, look for what's already existing and where you can fill the gaps. So maybe you need more examples of current models of strong emotional, social emotional skills. And these can be woven into other content areas like science and math as well. Again, we would want to look at what's currently available and what's currently being discussed and how can we weave them in. Okay, talking about math, we're going to go into looking at instructional practices, and all of the content areas can use the following three categories of practices. So each of these, reflection, active learning, and discussion techniques, are categories. And under these categories, there are many different activities that and methods and techniques that can be used. So I don't want you to feel like I'm leaving out the other content areas. If you are a PE teacher or an art teacher or a music teacher, what active learning is happening and how does that engage students in some of these competencies? The same goes for reflection. At the end of every activity or at the end of every class, can there be a level of reflection that fits in with the competencies? The same goes for discussion. I would encourage every classroom to have opportunities for group work and discussion, but we want to make sure that those techniques are grounded in perspective taking and accountable talk and the ability to have productive conversations with our peers. Okay, so you can see that on a daily basis, we can make sure that there are instructional practices. If you were to go into the classroom tomorrow, you can start by incorporating just these three areas. Keep in mind that you want to start where you're comfortable and use what you have already used if it's working. Okay, if you have discussion techniques that you use that you find is really helpful to get kids to take some perspective of the other person or practice empathy, continue it. But if what's working right now isn't working as well, then that's the area you want to target and say, okay, I'm going to look back at those competencies and I'm going to really build in a strategy or an activity that can help build that competency. That being said, I know that our time has come to a close. I really want to take this opportunity to invite you to look again at this, this stool and see, where do you think these three aspects, what's the status currently in your school or in your classroom? And perhaps you can choose one area to focus on, or maybe you want to pick one idea to focus on in each of the three areas. Because everything you learned today should be actionable tomorrow. And just so that you know how we can support you additionally, like I mentioned, we have many resources on our website. We're developing more daily. So you're going to want to check that out. And I will be following up with each of you individually because I can share with you what this would look like if we came into your building. Everything is extremely customized to your student population and your current needs. So like I said, we would do a deep dive. We would provide that upfront training. And then we have a supportive collaboration coaching model that comes in and helps with the implementation of these ideas, as well as the troubleshooting and measuring progress. So I hope that you all have at least one or two takeaways from today. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or to get back to me when I follow up with you. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.